comes and tells me to get them all done by next week, I can go, hey, sir, remember that video? It's great to be here. A tremendous turnout. Thank you very much for showing up here. It's an amazing collection of people with it's a very complex thing we're trying to work on. Because as General Brown just laid out very well, the challenge of trying to bring some unity of effort, I shouldn't say, there's always been some unity of effort, but a better unity of effort across the Army total school system is not an easy thing to do. If you remember his very first slide, he had General Sherman. Who came from Washington this year? I know we have the G3 folks, a few others. If you came from Washington, General Sherman in about 1880 got so fed up with Washington and the Secretary of the War and the bureaucracy in Congress that he moved his headquarters to St. Louis just to get away from Washington. It's a great testament to his leadership in setting this place up, but also knowing when to run and go somewhere where you can really make a difference. So Army University, let me talk about a little bit of bureaucratic speak for a couple minutes, because I want to show a little bit about the structure. This is not only for all the university folks in the room, but even the Army folks who have no idea what we're kind of going to have for a structure, because it does matter a little bit. So let me do that a little bit, and then I'll expand on a few areas that General Brown highlighted, and then take some questions. So next slide. This is a quote, and just so the ladies in the room don't feel left out, in 1907 he was only many men. I'm sure if he was here today he would say, thinking men and women, and fools can be men and women, and in our fighting forces as men and women, right? But the idea is still the same, right? We want thinking people. General Brown laid out pretty well why it's important. The challenge of the 101st in Ebola, fighting Ebola. The challenge of E5 in Afghanistan as the vehicle comes at you, and you have rules of engagement, and they may or may not be perfectly laid out, and the situation is different, and what are you supposed to do when you have about a second and a half to respond? And if you respond wrong, you could be up on a court-martial. You could be on TV. Your family could be being harassed back in the States because of what you did. Pretty hard stuff we're asking people to do. You didn't have that challenge, as you mentioned. In World War II, Vietnam, there was TV cameras in some of those places, but it isn't like today. And so it's a very different challenge. Next slide. I wanted to highlight this out there because you will hear when you're around the Army about the Army operating concept, what that means. Just so you have some perspective for those of you who aren't around the Army, that really is the underpinning. Unified Land Operations is the underpinning of all the Army doctrine, which drives our training, drives our education over time. And this is a change in how we do it. There's a transformation in how we do it. And the picture is worth 1,000 words. It kind of explains what General Brown was talking about in terms of the complexity of what you find on the ground. Right? In World War II, fundamentally, the soldiers in World War II walked across France. Right? There was tanks, there was some trucks, but fundamentally, they walked across France and into Germany and diverted left or right a little bit, but never more than 30, 50 miles right or left and went straight. That's really what generally happened. That's not the case today. Now you go in there with a battalion, and you have special operations forces in the area that you may be supporting, they may be supporting you. You walk up, and there's Doctors Without Borders, there's High Commissioner for Refugees, or the country you're working in, and some of them think you're a two-headed monster because you're in the U.S. Army, right, or Marines, and some of them think you're their best friend because they've worked with you before. That's really hard stuff to deal with. So that kind of gives you a sense of all that stuff lying on. Three-dimensional battle space, space down on the ground, local populations, urban centers with 25 million people. Think about Istanbul, Mexico City, places like that. If you had to, even if you're doing humanitarian relief in a place like Mexico City, 25 million people, if they all needed one meal a day, who's ready to provide 25 million meals? Really nobody, but the only chance maybe is the Department of Defense, right, in the United States would have to go figure out how to do that because it's really hard challenges, right? And we would do it in cooperation with the UN. So that's what you're asking lieutenants, captains, sergeants to do, and that's why we need them to be more critical, creative thinkers. And if you want to make people more critical, creative, if you don't take advantage of the university system of the United States, boy, are you screwing up. Because why are so many international students trying to come here? Because we have the best public-private university system in the world. Okay? Doesn't mean there aren't some good colleges and universities around the world, but the place that has the best aggregate is us. And so that's why we're glad you're here, and that's why the Army wants to partner more, as Jonah Brown spelled out very well, not less. We're trying to take all the ink spots, connect them, and make it better. So next slide. The initiatives, this is really what was in the charter from the Secretary of the Army, and those initiatives, and obviously we'll share the slides, you can all have them afterwards, but I really just want to show you on the right-hand side, how did we try to figure out what panels we wanted today, and we have the partnership one tomorrow. Those panels are driven by these initiatives. These are the things we're trying to tackle. Some of them are, we've been working on them for a lot of years. You're never going to stop trying to grow more qualified students. You're never going to stop in, faculty development, right? But the strides in academia in the last 20 years on how adults learn, on how to really get a hold of students who don't really seem to get it, to be a flexible teacher so when you don't see the light bulb going off, you're ready to change what you're doing to try to get the light bulb to go on. Those are all, that's really been innovatively changed in the last 15 to 20 years. So even in the Army where we've been working this for a while, there are places that do it well, places that do it poorly. Our ability to measure where it's going well works well in some places and others. I know you have those same challenges. So that's why we pick some of these panels on what they are, because we're trying to learn, and hopefully you can learn from us, and collaboratively we can see kind of the best of breed and things we want to tackle. And then after today, we can then go out and try to further research those. Go ask, call for papers. Use our research money and other things and working with you to collaborate to work down the road on some of those things. So next slide, please. I want to do a few slides just to show you there is a bit of a structure to this. There's a few people from anywhere from 1 to 25 associated with each of these blocks, but this is really their purpose slide in terms of what the kind of pieces are. So we have the Army Press. The Army Press really was a combination of the old military review for the military folks in the room and the Combat Studies Institute group together that we used to publish under the Strategic Study. We combined those together under the Army Press. And this is really an important part of our effort because in the last 15 years, the Army got out of writing a lot. I don't know if we ever wrote a lot in the 90s. We certainly got out of the practice. We wrote stuff in the last 10 years, 15 years, but it tended to be mostly about, hey, counterinsurgency, quick lessons learned. What do we need to get out in the field? People are getting ready to go again. What are some tactical lessons learned? But sitting down and really thinking about writing things, pushing the envelope, we didn't do. So we're trying to get back to that. Secondly, we're trying to better capture and be a source for other people that are writing. The Army Press, like any university press, reaching out into academia and other places going, hey, we like what you're doing. Do you want to publish with us? Because we want to push the envelope of professional military education and thinking in the Army. The next one is the Vice Provost for Learning Systems, Colonel Michael Harlan. Michael, you in the room here somewhere? You're in the back somewhere. He's in the back over there. So he is our Vice Provost for Learning Systems. You can see that all the different functions that come underneath there. But a lot of that, knowledge management, the academic research part, special programs comes underneath him. The Army has Army service components. The United States Army Pacific under General Brooks out in Hawaii with the Near East Studies Institute. You have in Germany underneath the United States Army Europe, and you have the Marshall Institute. Lots of places where we already have academic centers and places that we do education. And we're trying to make sure we're better connected to those organizations because those are the places that are supporting the combatant commands, working with the State Department overseas and other places that we want to make sure we're set up to help solve their problems, right? So what's our connective tissue to them, right? And that's what Michael also works on. And then when they do have ideas, how do we bring them in here and let General Brown at CAC and the Army University System go, who's the best person to help answer this? Where in academia can we get help, as you heard him talk about? Where in Army expertise can we get it? Do we need to have Army Research Institute or some other university help us figure these solutions out? That's kind of that collaboration part to make sure we're connected to what's going on out in the Department of Defense in the service component commands because they're the ones who are really fighting the wars, setting the conditions, doing all those engagements overseas. The next one is the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, Colonel Steve Dalveau here. Steve Dalveau right there. He's going to be up on one of the panels later. So coming underneath him, you see the things we have, staff and faculty development under the Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence. You have our accreditation efforts. We're fortunate to have Brigadier General Gene LaBeouf. Gene, if you can stand up for a minute and wave your hand. Gene is a United States Army Reserve. He'll be coming, he teaches at Vanderbilt. He'll be coming here probably late January, United States Army Reserve, to take that position as the Vice Provost. And Steve will move down to be the deputy, and he's actually happy to do that because then he won't have as many meetings because he'll have somebody else to go to him for him. And you can all appreciate that. So, that's a total Army school system. We want somebody who really thinks and breathes and smells National Guard Reserve challenges. So we have National Guard officers on the staff. We'll have him there because even though I like to think I know the total Army school system, I don't have nearly the experience he does in those kind of things. And so you want somebody who's going, hey, that will work, but here's how we're going to have to change it to make sure it's really integrated across the Army. So that's kind of the structure, just so you know and you get a sense of it. And if you really are uptight, we can show you the real ugly wire diagram with all the little pieces, but you really don't want that. Next slide. This is kind of a reflection of what General Brown talked about in terms of the pieces. So I'm not going to repeat everything he said, but I want to highlight just a couple things. What it tries to get is, I would call that whole page the background space of a Venn diagram. Think back to your old SAT when you had the weird questions, and a couple of circles. Well, there's always a green field behind it. In a lot of ways, that's the Army University part. As General Brown was talking about, those things that, West Point, in a part of the Army War College has a slightly different relationship. It's all part of the greater university system, but it's not a command relationship. That's kind of for the Army people in the room. We're always like, well, who's in charge? This is not a command relationship. The Army University is in charge of very little. We are a unity of effort part, but you see the whole left-hand side, because of the structure of how it's set up, like a university system with a provost, a vice chancellor here, Major General Rapp at the Army War College is the vice chancellor for strategic education, and then General Perkins is the thing. The far left-hand side, all of us have a tie to everything on the right in different ways, pieces, right? General Brown, he is the rater. He evaluates those maneuver centers, those schoolhouse commandants. He has a direct role in what they're doing every day. When he calls them, they kind of jump, right? But he doesn't call them every day about academic governance and things we're doing. That's where we come in. There's a provost. You do the day-to-day operations and academic governance and all those things. But in the Army tradition, when every now and then when you kind of need the weight of the president of the university and the chancellor, that's when you bring the big folks up and you get General Brown and General Perkins to help solve it. The nice thing so far, we've only been around for a couple months, is that it's amazing to me. I'm very surprised how little having to beat people about the head and shoulders you really need, because the vision and the strategic guidance that the Chief and Secretary did for this, when you go look at the proclamation for it, it makes perfect sense. General Brown, went through all the different parts about what it's trying to do. Better credentialing, better academic governance, better professional military education, so our soldiers are better, right? Nobody argues with that. So anything you're doing to make that happen, you really don't get a lot of people going, well, I'm not sure we should do it. They might want to tinker around the edges, but no one says it's a bad idea, because there isn't a bad idea on the page. Okay, so that's kind of the nice part. And you see some of the strange things that are out there that you may not recognize. The TRADOC Cultural Center that works cultural affiliation, cultural education across the schools and centers. When the 101st is getting ready to go to Ebola, when a unit's getting ready to go to Europe and work in the Ukraine and do things useful, that's a place where we have people who work the culture in that region and can come run classes and teach. That's an example of trying to bring this hodgepodge of 70-plus TRADOC centers and schools together into a more holistic system. And he already talked about West Point and their relationship's a little bit different, and the War College is a little different, only because so General Rapp has the strategic end of it, but let's face it, here we're training the mid-career at Fort Leavenworth, mid-career majors who are going to go on to the War Colleges, their next professional military education. We have warrant officers that we work the core training for them. Sergeant Majors Academy that we work with the Sergeant Major of the Army and other folks on NCO development. And so that transition from that mid-career to strategic is a very important lash-up that we have to make sure that General Rapp and his team are involved in what we're producing and what they're receiving, so we don't have any seams there, particularly in the higher-end GO, colonel classes, things like that. Next slide. This is a slight difference of the slide General Brown saw, but very similar stuff. I just want to highlight one or two things. One of the challenges we have in professional military education is the rate of innovation. If you're a professor at a university and you've been teaching for a couple of years and you want to bring something new in the class, you kind of own that. You can do it. In the Army, we've always been a little hung up on what are training, tasking, and standards things, and what is education and learning outcomes, and never the two shall meet, right? Except for when you get a really good critical creative professor, instructor who tries to bring thinking to it. And we've always had that challenge. I jokingly say, for the historians in the audience, I'm sure Baron von Steuben and George Washington used to argue about, were we doing training or educating today in the Revolutionary Army, right? And we still do it 240 years later. So for the first time under Army University, we now have the training developing side, the people at Fort Eustis. Tom Daly's here in the office, here in the room, back over there. So Tom, who really focuses, his group has been focused on kind of the platform, what it takes to be an instructor, faculty person on the platform, typically at the NCO and junior officer side. And then Fort Leavenworth, where we had the mid-career majors and worked on Captain's Career Course. And now, for the first time, we have them under one umbrella underneath the Army University. So now they're storming and norming and working. How are we going to make this a more holistic fit so we're optimizing that opportunity, right? You shouldn't have to be said, oh, you're perfectly good to teach here, and you do it for 3 or 4 years, and then you come in and you move locations, you're going to teach somewhere else, and they go, well, you need faculty development. What are you talking about? I've been teaching for 4 years over here. Yeah, but that's different. That's not good enough for us or whatever. That's a challenge. That's the bureaucratic part we're trying to talk about. So that's one of them. So our rate of innovation, it was typically 3 to 4 years to get new ideas into the classroom. Because in the Army, we tend to be checklisty in some things. If we're doing training things and you got to come up with the idea, you got to develop the POI, you got to implement it, and then to get that thing, if that's a total Army school system, you have to get that spread to all those 50 states for a National Guard training thing. That's not an instant thing to do. So our effort is to try to bring learning outcomes together, give a little more mission command, that's the Army term, a little more mission command, a little more flexibility in the platform to say, look, these are the learning outcomes. You have a lot of freedom to modify what you're doing. If you're a good staff and faculty person, if you're a good instructor, you know how to take those learning outcomes and really absorb the student, get them actively involved using adult learning, and they're going to get a lot out of it. That isn't always the case, and so we're trying to really spread that everywhere, make it kind of a thing we do. General Brown talked a whole bunch about the faculty part and degree opportunities. We're going to have some panels on that, so I'm not going into them. We do have some unique folks in the room to help support that. We do have the Go Army Ed folks here that were briefly talked about. We have Recruiting Command here. We have the people that run the Credentialing Opportunities website that are in the room. So when you see the list of all the attendees, you'll see that shortly. Pretty unique opportunity to try to figure out, because all those things are not easy to do when you want to make changes. And so we got a great opportunity to do that today. I think I'll leave it there because there's only about 3 or 4 minutes to the break, and I'll just take any questions. Anybody's got any questions at the provost level instead of the vice chancellor level? We good? Well, we'll have more chance tomorrow for the bulk of you that are coming today. We have one in the back over there. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Good morning. Could you please expand more about promote partnering and networking with civilian universities? My name is Dr. Ted Richardson. I'm from Florida Institute of Technology, and we partner with a lot of the military bases that you talked to today. So I'd like to hear more about what your mission will be with partnering and networking with civilian universities.
Well, to expand on what General Brown said a little bit. So, the Army already has those relations with 95-plus college universities. Okay? And every place is in a slightly different situation how they do it. Just in terms of credit, what classes people get credit for, what ones do or don't work, what regional accrediting bodies have kind of worked and accepted, right? And so the example might be if the MI school at Fort Huachuca has worked out a good degree program and college credit for some prior learning and some of what we're doing on our platforms that transfers over, and they've fought that battle in that region in the Southwest, that doesn't translate across. Obviously, we know that. For other regional accrediting bodies. And what's the incentive for the MI school to go fight at Fort Benning to do that same thing in the Southeast or here in the Midwest with the Higher Learning Commission? There's really no incentive, right? Other than if they have a friend, they don't mind doing it. But so Army University is kind of that umbrella to say, look, we're not in one region. We're across the country. And so how can we work with all the regional accrediting bodies to take advantage of what happens in one place and see if we can migrate that to someplace else? Because now we have people whose full-time job is to help do that. Towards the partnership things, as we all know, and I know we get a lot of it, issues with vol ed, right, and issues with tuition assistance, and issues with what Congress put into rules, and issues with DOD instructions. Well, it's pretty hard for the proponent, for General Brown, who's at Fort Benning, to go fight that battle, right? He's got a lot going on when you're the commandant of a school. You're in charge not just of education, you're in charge of doctrine, you're in charge of training, you're in charge of the future equipment for infantry and those kind of things. Well, we don't have that burden. We're just about education, right? So now they can take those problems and say, look, we're really beating our head against the wall. We're striking out. We've been trying to partner with Florida Institute or with Clemson or wherever else, and we're beating our heads against the wall, getting nowhere. Can you take it up? And now we have somebody else who can help work it. It's not trying to stop any of the work they're doing, because we're not going to be a 2,000-person organization that can do all the work for everybody. But we do have people then, when people are trying to work something and strike out or beat their heads against the wall, or there's an Army reg that won't let you do it, or a DOD reg, we have the ability then to kind of force it and say, okay, that's now our burden. We'll take that and we'll work it for you. I don't know if that helps a little bit. We'll get more of that on some of the panels too.
I think another area, when you look, and again, we'll cover, I think, a lot of this in the panel, but another area of great potential. We want, for example, in a school, we want outside expertise to come in. And, for example, we've had here, we'll bring in business students from university, a local university, in a leadership course. So you have 10 military, 10 business students, and then some business leaders. This is what we haven't done, gone outside. We tend to be military only. And so, that perspective when you're solving a problem is not always, it's not how it's done when you deploy anywhere in the world, no matter what the problem is. It's not done that way anymore. They're very complex problems, and we have to work together with everybody. So we want more perspective. So when you look at, you might be partnered with folks and doing that already. Some folks aren't, or they don't have a base around them. So we want to expand that ability to partner. And there could even be, as we look, and we're going to have a whole panel on this, potential of maybe we send students to that university in a seminar. Maybe we send them, we already send students for degrees to certain universities after they're done in our, so maybe that expands, or maybe there's potential there. Maybe faculty exchanges. We send a military faculty, an ethics professor that we have that teaches at a civilian university, and so, they exchange and send one to us. There are some very difficult to do under the current system, some of these things, and there's a whole bunch more potential. Just think about working together to solve complex problems, unbelievable potential. And then just one other example, when I was commanding Fort Benning, it's the Maneuver Center of Excellence. So we were really working on improving soldiers' ability and their optimizing their performance and getting at some of these key issues. Well, we just happened to stumble upon, for example, a Department of Defense research grant was given to a school in California on how soldiers learn and the brain functions. Now, we just happened to stumble upon that, and we contacted them. We said, hey, we're working some of the same things here at Fort Benning. They said, oh, thank God you contacted us. We had no idea what they really wanted in this study. And so we were able to provide them soldiers and experts working together. They had the grant, but we really helped them, and they helped us, and they helped the Army as a result, because we were able to work together on this. But it was just pure accident that we found. It shouldn't be pure accident. And there's research. We ought to have a linkage of where are the experts that can help with that, and everybody will benefit from it. It doesn't take away that universities get a research grant. In fact, it just makes it much more effective when you have the experts linked in as another example. And there's a whole bunch of examples. I talked also about those folks we send out for continuing education, having a greater linkage to the Army. And then there's also the transcript aspect. We don't have one now for what we do. We've got to have one. We've got to figure out how to get that accredited. And then so you don't have to make that tough decision telling Sergeant Brown, hey, really, you only get 6 credits. I know you took 30, but you only get 6 credits for that. At least Sergeant Brown would know going in, I'm only getting 6 credits, or I'm getting 8, or I'm getting 10, or whatever, so you have a much clearer picture with this relationship and working together. It's really about cooperation and collaboration, and quite honestly, the sky is the limit, as I see it, in how we, again, we'd be foolish not to take advantage of the greatest university system in the world. And we already do, but not nearly enough. Very stovepipe, very hit or miss. Different rules for active guard and reserve again. And none of this, again, will run into bureaucracy. Some of this won't happen instantly. I don't want you to walk out of here thinking it's all resolved. Anybody that's ever worked for the government knows that that's not the case. But the good news is we have an organization that can help synchronize, coordinate, pull this together, and there's folks that exist to do this already, and maybe it's, we just work with them a little bit on, hey, this affects the whole force, and then, again, sort of linking those folks that are out there that in many cases don't know. The biggest thing I find, folks outside the military do not know where to go to do these linkages. Just if you have a base in your area and they happen to reach out to you, or you have to reach out to them, it happens. But that's a small portion of the country. And many of you here don't have a base near you. How do you link in and take advantage of this? So again, there'll be a panel where we'll talk, there may be lots of other things we haven't even thought of ways that we can partner, what you're going to see, I know every time we partner with a university in any form that I've seen, the university comes back and they're like, wow, that was fantastic. Your students are very mature. They have an unbelievable worldly experience, and they're so professional, and so the university benefits. We benefit immensely every time. I've never seen it where, that was a wash, it didn't do it. It's always been a huge win for all of us, tackling these tough, complex issues out there. And again, you turn on the news, and if we don't think we need to work together better to solve some of these complex issues, then shame on us. These are tough, complex problems, and we need to work together to be the best we can to solve these tough issues, or shame on us. But there'll be a bunch more on that, and so on the panel, I think that'll be a great discussion.
So let me wind it up there. Just so you know how we laid this out, we have the panels. We asked the panelists not to go too long. We kind of cut them off on not very many slides, a couple if they're useful, because we want to get some ideas. We asked people to come in with some of the ideas that they've done, people we've worked with, and then have a lot of time for discussion and dialogue on how we would and get the ideas exchanged on that. So at this point, we'll take a break, and why don't you take over. Thank you.
The time is currently 9:30. We're going to break until 9:45. I just request you be back in your seats at 9:45, and we will have an attendees list available at the end of the day.